everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer, and welcome to the Wasteland. And this is my first episode on my long journey through the filmography of Martin Scorsese. So wrapped up last week with Eyes Wide Shut, had a big group with Frank, Aaron, and Vinny, and this week going back solo to start off my journey into the works of Martin Scorsese with Who's That Knocking at My Door? And after a little trimming, because two of his early documentaries, can't find them, so I couldn't watch them, so I couldn't record a video about them. So now we're down to this. If the rest go as planned, I will be having 38 videos focusing on films from Martin Scorsese that he has directed, and a variety of different kinds of things, and this is one of his earliest ones. But here on the show, we have 3 segments. We start with Coming Attractions, where I talk about the most anticipated film for myself and my guests, if we have any, for the week that this video comes out. Then we go into our feature film, which I'll be talking about Who's That Knocking at My Door, and then I'll be giving some recommendations. I have a couple of films I wanted to throw out there. But to get things started with the Coming Attractions, so September 17th brings an interesting variety of films coming to you, including, which this one was real close to being my number one that I was definitely going to talk about a little bit more in depth, but that's Crime Macho from Clint Eastwood. We also have Everybody's Talking About Jamie coming to Amazon. The Eyes of Tammy Faye with Jessica Chastain and Andrew Garfield looks really enticing to me as well. And a whole bunch of other films, including Blue Bayou, Cop Shop, The Duke, The Nowhere Inn. But my number one that I was most anticipating, 100%, was Prisoners of the Ghostland. And this is a film from Sion Sono, who had directed films like Love Exposure, almost a 4-hour erotic epic, which I got to watch because of the Filmstagram Movie Club. But most importantly, for me personally, this has Nick Cage in it. So, and seeing that this is some kind of samurai, western, dystopia, all rolled into one, I'm like, I can't say no to that. Nick Cage being his Nick Cageiest, Sono being a really talented auteur director, and just this world that I saw in the trailer made me very enticed to trying to check out what the hell this film was about. Did get to see a screener, and this is bonkers. It is a crazy fun time, so definitely was looking forward to this film coming out on the 17th, so y'all should go check it out, show it some love. I don't know how regularly accessible it's going to be in theaters around. Might be on VOD. Find it when you get a chance and just enjoy the absolute mayhem that is this film. But let's get into our feature film, Who's That Knocking at My Door? So this is Martin Scorsese's feature-length debut. So Who's That Knocking at My Door is a film. So JR is a typical Italian-American on the streets of New York. When he gets involved with a local girl, he decides to get married and settle down, but when he learns that she was once raped, he can't handle it. More explicitly linked with Catholic guilt than Scorsese's later works, we see what happens to JR when his religious guilt catches up with him. And this is a very interesting drama that we have here, focusing on this budding relationship between JR and girl, as she is credited, and this is starring Harvey Keitel as JR, his first of 6 collaborations with Martin Scorsese, which most people think De Niro, DiCaprio, but you had Keitel as well, early on in leads, later on in supporting, like in Taxi Driver and The Irishman, but you have him, and then you have Zena Bethune, who she had been in like Planet of the Apes and other films earlier around that time, because this film came out in 1967. But watching this film, you could definitely see early Scorsese working, camera movements, and the energy and the love of music, and how that's incorporated into the film. You see those early hallmarks even though like this is a really low budget early film, it's very grainy. You look at it just like you could tell this was like a low budget film from the late 60s, but you can feel that spark, that attitude, that creative force that is Scorsese early on watching this film. And you could definitely see a lot of other hallmarks here, but you also have Keitel, who's showing very early on he's a very talented actor. He brings that emotion, he brings screen presence into this film even at such a young age. And obviously as he grows older, it's like he can command the screen. He can show up in like Pulp Fiction and just steal the show for a scene as the Wolf, which I'm a huge fan of the Wolf's work. But you have Keitel in this film, and he's asked to do a lot in terms of, you see him being sweet and trying to be romantic. You see how these complexities in this budding relationship are brought into light in this film, and Keitel is able to show that range of emotions, that frustration, that fire. And despite the fact that he is of Jewish ancestry from Eastern Europe, he does a fine job as an Italian American here, and that's always the interesting thing is like as an Italian American, like the biggest films that you get to see as an Italian American are mob movies, and usually it's the mafia, and you see these Italian American mafia members, and you have films like The Godfather where you had Brando and James Caan playing Italian Americans, but you also had Pacino and De Niro and John Cazale, and you had that mix. And here it's like Harvey Keitel has played plenty of Italians at points throughout his career, and like mob guys and criminals and a whole bunch of other things, but like he does a really fine job here embodying this. And you could definitely tell there is a very specific genuine feel to this, because it's like you watch The Godfather, you can tell Coppola knows this life and it feels so genuine in the details, and you could watch a Scorsese film and really understand like he gets the Italian American experience, and you get that from this film. But you also get specifically his cinephile aspects, and like because like Scorsese's a great director, but he is also a student of film. You can tell how much he loves film and all the nods that he does, what he's gained from other films, and you have these characters in this film of JR and Girl connecting over conversations about film. The whole John Wayne thing, talking about The Searchers and building a connection, talking about cinema. And you get that. You could tell that this film is probably very personal for Scorsese, dealing with his love for film, trying to like bring that into this relationship, trying to hook the girl with talking about like, gotta see this John Wayne picture. John Wayne, Jeffrey Hunter, and Natalie Wood, and all the great moments that make up The Searchers, which is one of my favorite films in the 1950s. And shamelessly, you could go to our Development Hell podcast episode and hear more about it. But you can definitely tell that JR loves film, and he has that connection. And that's probably very personal for Scorsese. And you have a lot of the guilt, that Catholic guilt. It's very strong in Italian American culture because Catholicism is so deeply rooted in Italian American culture. And you can feel that with JR. There's certain things like he feels obligated to like, I have to have a problem with this, and like, and it causes a lot of toxicity in his relationship that he's developing with Girl in this film. And along with the cinephile aspects, like the Italian Americans, like you can feel these characters are very genuine. And it was funny, I'm sitting there watching this with my fiance Jess, and she's making comments. It's like, how many scenes in this movie is a bunch of like young men be like, hey, what are they? Like, yeah, that's about right. It's that energy, it's that loudness, it's that big, bold expressions of feelings, which is like really not me. I'm the quiet kid in the family. But like, I've observed that my whole entire life, and you walk into a row home in South Philly is like, hey! You got Philly Italians, you have New York Italians, they're a lot alike. And you have all those moments with JR and his friends and those connections, and you have that one scene where they're at this party and there's that Spanish music playing on the soundtrack for Us, and it just escalates. You get that aggressive, angsty young men feeling about things, and it just boils over, and it's so very genuine in the way that, like, yeah, this stuff kind of happens. You have a bunch of riled up young men, a bunch of young Italian men, and they're all just like getting high energy and just getting into each other's faces, and one wrong little push sends that snowball going, and that's one of those scenes that really captures that. And there's a lot of moments between JR and some of his friends. It's just like Leonard Karas, who plays his friend Joey, and you have all of these different kinds of relationships, and it's such an interesting film where it's just like nothing. There's a few moments that are bold and different. There's also a few moments where it's like JR's imagining these things, and Scorsese's able to bring those dreamlike sequences in here and really bolster the visual storytelling, as you have that moment when girl's telling JR about her being raped, and you see what's going on there, and it's hard to watch. It's very visceral. And you show a later scene in terms of big uses of music. JR has this dream, and Anne Collette plays this young woman who is having this very aggressive and provocative sexual encounter with. He's like strapped to the bed, and they're doing all kinds of different things to the song "This Is the End" by The Doors, and it's really uncomfortable and unnerving, and it brings those darker thoughts that like you're supposed to repress and push away because gotta be a good Catholic. And all of that comes rushing back, and you have at the end of the film when all of this is all wrapping up and settling in, and you have all these like flashes of Catholic imagery, and you're just like, well, it's coming for you all the way at the end. And obviously the whole center of this film is this budding relationship, and how JR is not exactly ready to have a real relationship here, a real connection, because he needs to get over certain things, and like he starts victim blaming girl because she was raped and she is not unsullied, and you have that horrible reaction, and the way that his perspective on it is that he'd be willing to forgive her and get past it like it's her fault, and like there's an issue there that she did, and it's just like, why did you go out there with this guy? What were you expecting? And we've all heard these excuses put on victims, and this film is very provocative in the late 60s, confronting those kinds of things. And Scorsese's never been one to shy away from provocative things and ideas, and Who's That Knocking at My Door confronts those things head on in this film. And it's very unexpected for a film this, like, at this time period. This is the time period of Bonnie and Clyde and that shifting of things, where that counterculture is coming in, and then filmmaking of the 70s revolutionized film. And Scorsese was at the center of it, and you can see that here. And I think this film is a really special film. It's a great early effort here, and it showcases a great performance from both Bethune and also Harvey Keitel at the lead here as JR. And it has a lot of great style. It has dreamlike and intense sequences that Scorsese's showing off his ability as a director. There's so much going on here. It's so well done. And I'm such a huge fan of what Scorsese has done with his like popular films that we've all seen, and seeing this one, seeing those roots there, really made me happy and made me excited to check out more of his early films here. So I'm excited to check out more. And if you haven't seen Who's That Knocking at My Door, I rented this for literally $1.99 on Amazon, so give it a watch. And that's the feature of the week. Now we're going to shift gears into my recommendations. And one film that I added onto my watch list because it made the number 100 spot on the Filmstagram Top 100 this year was Taste of Cherry. And this Iranian film is very interesting as it's about a man driving around trying to find somebody to agree to bury him after he kills himself. It can get a little repetitive, but this film is so bold in the themes that it's trying to confront here. And it's one of the most challenging thematic films I think I've ever sat through because it really makes you think, what would you do? And you hear his interactions with all these other actors and these characters, and the performances are so strong. It was an engrossing and challenging film. I got to watch this on HBO Max, I'm pretty sure. So if you want to really challenge yourself as a film watcher and experience something deeply thematic and challenging, go check this film out. Also on HBO Max, new release, Malignant. And this is James Wan's return to horror, and seems to be a social media debate if this is really influenced by giallo horror or not. But I'm a huge Dario Argento fan, and seeing his film's combination of this detective type story and also slasher film, and Malignant combines that in some aspects and also has some supernatural and strange, crazy action sequences too. And this is a campy, ridiculous time that I might not have felt completely emotionally attached to the film, but I was along for this thrill ride of impressive filmmaking, crazy twists, and actually really intense, unnerving moments paired with some crazy over-the-top action. And it is a ridiculous time. You have this weekend and a couple more weeks because it's on HBO Max for 30 days, but it's also in theaters. So if you want to go watch it in a theater, go check it out. And my last recommendation is from my collection here. Right down there is Gosford Park. And I rewatched this murder mystery from Robert Altman, the king of ensemble casts, because this is a very British film, interesting enough, and it has an incredible ensemble of Michael Gambon, Maggie Smith, Kristen Scott Thomas, Charles Dance, Richard E. Grant, Helen Mirren, Kelly MacDonald, Clive Owen, Tom Hollander, really young Tom Hollander, Ryan Phillippe happened to be in there, Bob Balamet, they're the two Americans. Stephen Fry plays this funny investigator who comes in. Not quite Benoit Blanc, but Stephen Fry-esque. And you have even more. There's so many actors in this, and it's deeply thematic. It looks at classism and different perspectives, and there's plenty of mystery, all with all these drapings all over it. So if you want a fun, interesting, and intriguing time with plenty of great actors giving great performances with crazy amount of characters and a little bit of mystery thrown in there, go check out Gosford Park. But those are my recommendations for this week. And that's the show. I hope you enjoyed checking out my thoughts, specifically on Who's That Knocking at My Door. And next week, the plan is to be watching Street Scenes, which is a documentary from Martin Scorsese. And from what it looks like, I'm pretty sure I could... Actually, no, I couldn't find that one. So I believe the next film is Boxcar Bertha. So I don't know much about the film. I'm looking forward to checking it out, especially after this one. So I hope you tune in next week for another episode of Welcome to the Wasteland. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.